All right, guys, today we're going to talk about Standard 8.2, which is presidential policies from 1963 to 1974. So if you're keeping track, that's going to be John F. Kennedy, just a little bit, Lyndon Johnson, and Richard Nixon. So let's jump into these guys. As always, you can print the notes out from the website, and let's see what we've got going. Now, you know that not Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. When he's assassinated, he had a number of things coming down the pike in terms of policies that he wanted implemented, especially in the area of civil rights, as well as some other things. Well, Lyndon Johnson, on the other hand, has really, he's been the vice president, so he hasn't been making plans and designs for the future. He's been following the lead of President Kennedy. So when Kennedy's shot, Johnson says, let's pick up some of those programs because there's a lot of public support since we miss Kennedy. Let's put these things together in a package and introduce them to the public. He calls these things the Great Society. The idea is we're going to have civil rights legislation that's going to change the way we deal with African Americans in this country. This is loved by liberals. It's hated by conservatives because it expands everything the government does. It's going to spend more money now. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be involved in more things. And so a lot of people have some real questions about the Great Society. You can see down here that the spending, the dates you're not able to see because it's cut off, but the spending from when Johnson takes over till the end of his term, and really the end of when they create these programs, goes up from $4,000 per family to over $8,000 a family. That's a huge jump. It doubles. Between 1974 and the present, you don't have that big of a jump. So that's huge. Now, if you're, again, liberal, you love that. You say it's about time we help these people. But if you're conservative, you say not so much. Specifically, these programs include the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that makes a number of different forms of discrimination illegal. It also includes the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This is the one that says we can no longer have a poll tax or a literacy test before you have to vote. A Fair Housing Act that says you can't discriminate from housing based on race, and also an affirmative action plan. That just says that in some sectors of public life, we're going to make sure that a certain percentage of employees are African Americans. That's a little bit controversial, but Lyndon Johnson says that's the best way to right the wrongs of the past. These programs help African Americans, but a lot of Southern Democrats now say, I'm done with the Democratic Party. They were already upset after Truman desegregated the military, but this just pushes them over the edge, and now a number of them are going to start to vote Republican. Later on, Johnson says, let's help other groups of people. So he creates, with help from other Democrats in Congress, two programs. One is Medicaid, that helps needy folks get the medical care and medicine that they need, and Medicare, which does the same thing but for elderly folks. This, again, is going to cause the government to grow significantly and is either extremely popular if you're liberal or extremely unpopular if you're conservative. Johnson then says we need to do more for people who are disadvantaged. We need to make sure that people who in the inner city who may not have as much education, because remember, a lot of people have been moving out to the suburbs, taking the good schools and things with them. Let's make sure that our kids are getting the education they need starting at a very young age. My son currently is 3 years old. My son can read. My son knows a number of the states in the United States. He counted to 30 the other day. You know why he can do that? It's not because he's entirely brilliant, which he is. He's my son. It's because my wife and I sit down and work with him for an extended period of time. Well, if you live in the inner city and your parents are having a hard time keeping it together, they're working long hours, who's going to teach them that stuff? Who's going to teach them colors? Who's going to teach them numbers? Who's going to teach them to read? Lyndon Johnson says, well, nobody. So the government's going to do that. These programs do, over time, help the poor and elderly. They reduce the poverty rate. But they're built on this New Deal idea that it's the government's job to make sure that you're okay. Conservatives say it's not the government's job to make sure I'm okay. I should choose how to invest my time and my resources and my money. And if I make stupid decisions, I should pay for those stupid decisions. So you have two very different ideas that are going back and forth. And not the New Deal, the Great Society is going to bring those things to a head. Again, I've mentioned this, but this is a little different twist on it. What ends up happening is that Johnson thinks he's doing something that liberals will love and conservatives should at least appreciate, but liberals say that's a great program. Why are you spending all this money in Vietnam when you could be spending more money on these programs? Conservatives say you're trying to help people, but you're making the government grow. You're trying to take care of everybody, and it's not the government's job to be your nanny. Okay? And so everybody gets kind of frustrated with Lyndon Johnson. Johnson chooses not to run for another term in 1968, which he could have. So Richard Nixon ends up getting elected. Richard Nixon is a Republican. And Nixon says, if you vote for me, I'll do two things. One, I'm going to slow down the rapid expansion of civil rights. Not that he's against them, but he knows if he says I'm for civil rights, the South will not vote for him. And they've been starting to vote Republican. The second thing is that Vietnam, which we'll cover in the next standard, has been going on. And Nixon says, if you vote for me, I will pull our troops out of Vietnam. And so Nixon gets elected. His slogan, the thing he says he's going to try to restore, is law and order. The idea is that the 60s have been full of protest marches and demonstrations and all kinds of things. Let's get back to law and order. Really, this is almost like when Warren G. Harding says, let's have a return to normalcy. It's kind of the same thing. Everybody wants peace and quiet, and Nixon says he's the guy to bring it. Oops. While he's campaigning, Nixon says, I already mentioned this, I'm going to end the Vietnam War, I'm going to limit Johnson's Great Society programs, and I'm going to limit how much we enforce civil rights in the South. Again, that's the Southern strategy, the term for Nixon's goal of getting the South to vote for him, at least the Southern Democrats to vote for him, a Republican. In reality, Nixon does end Vietnam, but it takes him 5 years to do. Secondly, the Great Society programs continue to advance. You saw that on that graph that I showed you a while back. Some of those increases come even after Nixon's in office. And the civil rights advances continue. He really doesn't stop anything. So the conservatives who voted for him, and even maybe some liberals, well, we'll get to the liberals in a second, but the conservatives are pretty unhappy with him. Nixon then upsets conservatives even more because he works with Democrats to pass environmental legislation. He helps get a Clean Air Act passed that says factories can't just pump all kinds of pollutants into the air, and a Clean Water Act that says they can't dump all their sludge into rivers. He gets an Endangered Species Act passed. He helps create the Environmental Protection Agency, and he signs it into law on the first Earth Day, which is usually, I think, April 22nd, at least it was this year. Conservatives start to freak out. Now, why is that? Why would some people not like these regulations? You might say everybody wants clean air and clean water. And you're right, but some conservatives would say that if businesses have to spend all this money to comply with regulations, to find something else to do with the sludge and the pollutants they're pumping into the air, they're not able to spend money on new jobs. So this is actually going to hurt the economy. That's the argument. You may decide if you think it holds water or not. When Richard Nixon is president, the economy is rough. There's not a lot of growth in the early 70s, and this continues into Jimmy Carter's term as president. The word for no growth is stagnant. Like if you see water that's just sitting there, we call it stagnant water. There's no moving. Well, the economy's like that in the 70s. So, in other words, people are not getting raises. My income is not getting greater. At the same time, Nixon is fighting a war in Vietnam, and so lots of money is being spent on the war. We're printing money to pay for the war, and that causes inflation. So the economy is really, let's see if you can, there's my hand, you can see my hand. The economy's flatlining like this, but costs are going up. So I'm not getting a raise, there's the stagnant chunk, but costs overall are going up. So I can't pay for my bills. I can't pay for my heat. I can't pay for my gas or for my food. This combination of a stagnant economy and inflation we call stagflation. It's a strange word, but that's the idea. The economy is just not moving. So Nixon says, all right, we're going to take care of this. Let's let the government control how much people get paid in some areas and how much things cost. Conservatives say, no, government's supposed to take its hands off of the economy and let things just happen. So he's further alienating himself from the conservatives. That is the end of standard 8 point, whatever that is. I think it's 8.2b, maybe. Join us next time for the Vietnam section. As always, shoot me emails if you have any questions. I hope you're learning and prepping for the EOC. Talk to you soon.